What is the state of VC landscape in India?
So, Mohit, the fundraise landscape of India is essentially 3 or 4 different entities from an equity perspective. The equity perspective, if you look at it at the lowest end of the spectrum, will be the angel investors.
Hi Prabhash, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Mohit. How are you?
Great. Before we start the discussion, I'll set the context and pace of the session. Today, we'll be talking about micro trends in Indian startups. Especially, we'll be focusing on VC ecosystem, right? And today we have Mr. Prabhash Nirbhay, who is Chief Evangelist of Jharkhand Angels. Before we start the discussion and delve into the set of questions that we have today, I am curious to know more about your journey. Like if you can, shed some light or give insights how your journey has been, it will be great.
Okay, so let me take that question in 2 parts, Mohit. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's always a pleasure to interact with an organization which is kind of a startup of the startup story ecosystem, because startup stories have been covered by multiple media houses, whether you talk about the established players or you talk about the emerging players. So you are, I would say, one of the emerging players in the industry. So in that sense, you and I are alike. We are both trying to make a difference to the startup ecosystem. So I started my career in 2002. I'm in the entire space of Web 3.0, Web 2.0, artificial intelligence, etc. I am a hardcore roti kapra makan person. I started with ACC Cement, then I went on to work with the urban brands, and eventually my last and the longest stint was with Sabmilla India, which was into brewing. It was one of the largest brewing companies in the world. 126 years old when I left. So my entire grooming has been around roti kapra and makan, and not so much into the new age technology companies, etc. And that gives me a huge edge over somebody who might have worked in tech for long, because I have no preconceived notions. I'm a blank slate from where I start when I engage with tech. Then in 2015, I quit to start a company called Flipcarbon. Flipcarbon has been consulting with SMEs and startups in India over the last 7.5 years. And we have done some great work with amazing startup founders and amazing family businesses as well. So, and that is what actually got me thinking that, one of the reasons I got thinking about Jharkhand Angels is because I realized that most of my clients were scattered around predominantly 3 geographies, Gurgaon, Bombay, and Bangalore. And India is not just Gurgaon, Bombay, and Bangalore. So I said, why would this be? And that's when I realized that while 45% of all companies are based out of tier 2, tier 3 towns in India, only 2% of funded entities are in tier 2 and tier 3. And that's where Jharkhand Angels was born. We are just about a year old now. Although unofficially we have engaged in Fundraise before that as well. And young organization, but we are doing some interesting stuff around D2C. We are doing some interesting stuff around deal discovery platforms. We are doing some interesting stuff around create a community for kids. So a very well-rounded list of companies that we have worked with so far.
That's pretty interesting. And you said you started off so early and you have varied experience in the industry as well. So yeah, I'm sure your experience might come in handy when you interact with a lot of clients and when you invest in the firms as well, right? So before we get into the nitty-gritties, so can you give me what is the state of VC landscape in India? Like if you can give me an overview about the industry, it will be great.
So, Mohit, the fundraise landscape of India is essentially 3 or 4 different entities from an equity perspective, right? And then there's, of course, the debt side of it. The equity perspective, if you look at it at the lowest end of the spectrum, will be the angel investors. That's where, for example, the Jharkhand Angels or Mumbai Angels comes in. The next could be family offices which directly invest. And then the third and the largest would be the venture capitalist fund. We typically start with funds which run into hundreds of crores of rupees, right? And the average ticket size also runs into $1 million plus. Most of the time, $10 million plus. the good news is that India is just emerging. It's not a matured economy from a startup landscape perspective at all. We are just kind of scratching the surface. Last year, we saw 50 plus unicorns being born. And this year, we have already seen almost 15 so far. Now, if you look at that entire ecosystem, we are only talking about people who have raised funds at $1 billion plus valuation. We are not even talking about people who are raising funds at $1 million valuation, $1.5 million valuation, which is the ecosystem I'm dealing with, right? My average value of a company I invest in as Jharkhand Angels is about $1.5 million. That's the valuation they are at when they seek funding, or sometimes even $500,000 valuation. Now that ecosystem, I'm told, is about 50, 60,000 companies, not 50, 60 companies. So a huge landscape being scratched at the surface. Not all of them have raised funds, but many of them can. We just heard the Mumbai Angels talk about 100 crores fund investment last year across about 60 deals, and they are talking about 500 crores by 2025. In comparison, Jharkhand Angels might participate in about a 10 crore fundraise this year, 22-23, because our ticket sizes are small. Our ability to engage with startups is not as established as some of the larger players. So it's a hugely emerging landscape. The VC end of the spectrum also is seeing some very interesting work happening. We have all heard of the Sequoias of the world, but there are a lot of micro VCs which are taking shape, which are starting with fund sizes of 30, 40, 50 crores and taking it forward from there. Now their ticket size is also small. They are not the tens of $1 million investors. They would be doing ticket sizes similar to angel networks, but much more organized, because they would be established entities. They don't have to seek investor permission every time you are doing a deal. Right? The approvals happen first and the deal happens next. And the deal is only centered towards the investment committee. In our case, every deal has to go through the investors who wants to invest, and then it takes shape. So ours is a more painful process, even if the deal size is similarly sized. Okay. A lot of exciting work happening.
Okay. That's pretty interesting, and you might touched upon this point, like how mature is the Indian market as compared to the rest of the world? Like when I compare Indian market with the world market which is out there. So, what are your thoughts on that?
So, if you look at the Indian market, like I said, it's emerging. It's not mature. We are still largely a job-centric market, right? People still like to go get a job. And that's the aspect around career. Even if they're well established, they have money in the bank, they have run 15, 20 years careers, people that are not yet startup-y in that sense in India. Most people will still like to play safe, which is not such a bad thing, because we need employees on the other side of the table as well. We can't just have employers, right?
Right.
But as we mature, we will see more people taking the entrepreneurial plunge early, which means in colleges, just off colleges. We are already seeing some of this action in places like BITS Pilani, places like IIT Chennai. These are the places where a lot of entrepreneurial activities are happening. We are also seeing a lot of entrepreneurial activities in Bharat, places like Chaibasa, Ranchi, Bokaro, Jamshedpur, Raipur. Indore has emerged very nicely in the startup ecosystem. So a lot of good news. I think 2022, 2025 is the period when we will see entities getting into the angel ecosystem will shift from the HNAs. Today, if you look at it, if you think of an angel, you think of an angel from the perspective of someone who is either an HNI mainstream or somebody who's a celebrity mainstream. You still hear about deals that the celebrities are doing. And most of the exits are also happening at that space. Current exits are all people who had surplus capital to invest. But over the last 1.5 years, middle class, upper middle class angels have emerged. People who have small ticket sizes, 2 lakhs, 2.5 lakhs, 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs. And these guys have not yet seen exits. They will see exits in the next 3 years. And that is when the scene will explode. It's like the maturity of mutual funds. Today, if you talk to people, many people invest in mutual funds, but the equity landscape is still small, the listed equity landscape. But mutual fund landscape has grown with the mutual fund Sahi Hai, campaign. Now we need a startup investment Sahi Hai campaign. You build the right ecosystem of safety, etc. Build the right protocols, make people understand that you make money if you do 10 deals. You can't make money on one deal, right? Then this ecosystem will also mature. So I think 2025 would be a very interesting year to watch out for. I think that is when even a SEBI will be forced to come up with the right kind of ecosystem for the angel ecosystem. Right now, they are good with the VC ecosystem. Category 1 AIFs are pretty standard practices, well covered legally. But angel networks are, in a manner of speaking, they are vague, right? We are just networks. We enable the investor to meet the startup, right? But actually, we need a regulatory environment. We need a facilitative regulatory environment where more people are encouraged to build angel networks, syndicates, etc. That will happen in the next 3 years, is my feeling.
Correct. So I'm sure government is taking a lot of initiatives, and I'm sure in this space as well, we'll see major changes in coming years, right? So which will enable a lot of people to, make them aware about the ecosystem as well, and that's how it will mature, right? So now that brings me to my next question. What are the key driving factors for the industry in India?
So if you look at driving factors, a lot of people think that the driving factor is the amount of money available. I don't think so. I think that the most important driving factor is youth. We have a demographic dividend, and that is what is giving us the results. Now you have people who are willing to take risks. You have people who have the ability to understand cutting edge, who have the ability to make a difference. People who are looking at trying to solve problems, and that's actually the input side of startups in India.
Correct.
The other input side of startups in India today is that I would call the IPL phenomenon of startups. When IPL started, what it did is it made cricket as a mainstream career. Because even if you never get to play for the national team, you will still make money.
Correct.
Which was not true earlier. So that used to discourage parents from encouraging kids to take up cricket as a sport. So similarly, taking up startup as a sport, that let me do a startup. That would have been very, very unsafe when I started my job. I Sanjeev Kumar, the CTO of Pine Labs, is a friend, and I admire him a lot for his ability to have left a safe job at ACC Cement and joined Pine Labs. When Pine Labs was a startup, when startup was not a buzzword. 2003, 2005, that period. A startup was not a buzzword then.
Correct.
So those were pioneers. Today, most people don't hesitate, to join a startup as long as the startup has at least got a brand for itself. Even if it is loss making, even if it is not generating profitability, and hence in that sense, it's still not a secure environment for people. But people take the risk as long as the brand has been established, even as employees. So those are some of the things I believe. I think the people side of it is the core. And the more it matures in terms of education shaping up nicely, your ability to shape up incubators, accelerators in colleges, in schools, this will become even more stronger. So that's where I think the core is.
Correct. That's true. So now this question is specifically for the VC ecosystem, right? So is there a particular checklist or a to-do list for a founder before seeking funding or pitching the idea to a VC? Let's say, for example, if I am a founder, I'm looking for an investment. So I'm sure there might be certain checks that the founder has to perform before pitching the idea. So in your experience, what are those checks or what are those two?
Good question, because one of the things I'm realizing as I'm engaging with startups is that you are a well-meaning individual and you start a company and a lot of things go right, but some of the fundamentals are not always in place, especially in Bharat, but also in India. For example, if you look at how a company gets started in India today, it is still largely a function of setting up forms and formats, engaging a company secretary, engaging a CA firm, and getting those things sorted out. But you don't start at a vision level. You don't start at a values level. You don't start at a understanding compliances well level. You don't start at a good bookkeeping accounting level. And most founders are not CHROs or CFOs, right? So these are two very important elements of your strategy, right? One deals with money, one deals with people. And these are fundamentally broken in many cases. You don't do your GST filing on time, it will have consequences later in life. You do your PF post 25 employees rather than at the right time, it will have consequences later for fundraise. And if you run out of money and then go for fundraise, it will have consequences. So if you look at a checklist perspective, I would say the first checklist is get your people checklist right. Make sure that from a people perspective, you are a company which is on the business of building an employer brand from day one. You are trying to do things which will enhance your employer brand. You are trying to do things which will secure you, early stage talent on campuses. You are trying to do things which will attract people towards your company, because talent is the key to the growth of any organization.
Correct.
Second part is the compliances aspect of people's side. Right? Make sure that you stay compliant. Make sure that you are a high integrity organization in that sense. Whatever you are doing on the people side are high integrity, because you do low integrity things now, later it will bite you. So similarly, on the finance side, if you think about it, most people will raise money when it's already too late. And when it is too late, you are under intense pressure to close a deal. When you are under pressure to close a deal, you can't get the best deal for yourself.
Correct.
You should start early, which means you should start when you still have 5-6 months of runway left, because fundraise takes that kind of time. Angel fundraise will take at least a minimum of 3 months. So if you go into a larger VC deal, it might take even longer. So from that perspective, you can't run out of funds or be very close to running out of funds and then raising. That's the second piece. The third piece is overall how you present yourself, right? While it's easy to prepare a pitch deck because there's a lot of copy paste available, being able to do it from scratch and telling a good story, you should spend time on that. Even if you should spend money on that as well, so that your pitch is market ready.
Correct.
You have the answers to both anticipated questions, and you are smart enough to answer unanticipated questions, right? And the fourth thing is self-assured founders are great, but cocky founders are not so much, right? Because the investor is your friend. So the investor is trying to be on the same side as you. He is not on the opposite side of the table. She is not on the opposite side of the table. So trying to be cocky with investors doesn't help. If, for example, if they ask you to do something which they think is in the greater interest of the organization, you can't resist, because then you are saying, I'll take your money, but I won't take your advice. It doesn't work like that. As soon as you are taking my money, I am on your board, whether officially or not, but I am a vested interest party, and I would like to protect my interest, and hence I will give you the right sort of advice, hopefully.
Correct.
You should be open enough to be taking those advices. A typical advice which founders tend to resist is the team advice, because investor will point out gaps in the team structure, and people will believe that we can do with this team, which is not true at all. I mean, if we could have done with that team, then they wouldn't have raised those issues. So the right answer is that we are building the structure, and the structure costs money. This fundraise is part of that, and subsequent fundraisers will be part of that as well. But we are completely committed to building a team.
Correct.
Similarly, the money question, where the money is coming in from, where the money is going. For example, sometimes you raise early stage fund very loosely. You go to friends, family, take a loan under some loan agreement, and then you have a very high loan book. And then you are trying to raise equity. People are going to wonder whether the equity will go into servicing the loans, or the equity will go into growing the organization. I would not want to invest in a company where my money goes into servicing loans, right?
Correct.
So if you have taken loans from friends, family, etc., raising funds means you should try and convert that into equity before you go for further fundraise, because people won't like you sitting on high payables, because then they are not sure whether money will go in the right direction.
Correct.
These are some of the quick checklists. Of course, the right thing to do is to sit down and actually prepare a checklist and say that this is what I'm going to build on. And Google is our friend. Go and research, find out more, uh, start early. And I tell people on day one, when you register a company, you should still already be thinking of yourself like a 100-year-old company.
Correct.
I've only worked in 100-year companies, whether it's Arvind or Sab Miller or ACC. There, Arvind and ACC are very close to being 100-year-olds. And Sab Miller was already a 100-year-old company when I joined them. So I always tell people, think of yourself like a 100-year-old company and do things. You might take 100 years to reach that space, but you should always be willing to believe that I will get there.
Correct.
And only when you believe that, you will put systems, processes, protocols in place which are meant to sustain that kind of a growth.
Correct.
So I'll give you an example. My current organization, Flipcarbon, about a 30-employee organization, right? I'm already thinking of what is my HR structure, because while I come from an HR background, I'm no more an HR professional as far as my own company is concerned. Right? So there has to be an in-house HR here as well, although we are all great experts in the field. Now it's very easy to say that we don't need one because now out of those 30 people, 15 might be HR professionals, and hence I don't need it. But that's not true at all. That is what is called in Hindi chirag tale andhera, because you never fix your own house. So I'm thinking of getting an HR person for myself who will do only in-house HR, because I believe that I will go from 30 to 100 pretty soon. And if that happens, if I haven't built a sustainable model, it will start collapsing around itself.
Correct.
So building sustainable models of business is very, very important. People think that the word agile means hustling all the time. It doesn't. Agile means doing things faster, right? But the same things fastest many times. For example, if you need to deploy processes, you need to deploy processes faster. If you need to write a policy, a 100,000 employee organization might take 3 months to write that policy. A startup needs to be done and dusted in the next 30 minutes, right?
Correct.
Because policy is only going to impact 20 people. Why will you take 20 days to write it? So from that perspective, agile only means processes but faster, not process less. Yes, you can break processes and make new one, because a startup environment is emerging and something that worked 6 months back may not work 6 months later, and it will be an iterative process. In a more mature organization, it won't be iterative. It kind of gets cast in stone and then gets re-looked at only after a certain period of time. But not having it is not a solution. For example, not having a goal sheet is not a solution. You should have a goal sheet for yourself, even as CEO of the organization. Write yourself a good set of goals and chase them down. Whichever methodologies you want to adopt. You want to go balanced scorecard? Sure. You want to go OKRs? Sure. You want to merge the two? Sure. But have a goal sheet. Choose it down.
Correct. Correct. That's very true. So that brings me to my next question. Where do you see yourself in the next 3 years, maybe?
So when you see myself in isolation as Jharkhand Angels, or
as a firm, right? So where do you see? Let me rephrase. Where do you see Jharkhand Angels as a firm in next 3 years?
So there are a couple of very clear directions. Okay, one is that we need to grow into a entity of significance. We are doing small deal sizes, small number of deals, but in 3 years we see ourselves reaching maturity where you will be doing a deal a week, and the numbers would be now running into not tens of crores but hundreds of crores. That's one piece of it. Second is we should have definitely created impact for the middle class investors and the middle class towns, right? So.
Correct.
And third, we should have solved the real problems. Like, for example, I believe that, we have so much to solve in health, nutrition, education, market access for people. Those are much more real problems to solve than, let's say, a cryptocurrency problem,
Correct.
So that's a clear direction in my mind, that I would like to focus there first as an entity. We will not say no to the others, but the others will not take away significant chunk of our time, because our focus will be very, very clear, granular, that solve a problem that India is facing today, solve a problem that Bharat is facing today, and I will put you ahead in my queue, if that's what you are doing.
Correct. Correct. That's pretty interesting. So one last question: what is the piece of advice that you would like to give to an entrepreneur of today, in your experience?
I would say have fun. Entrepreneurship is difficult, and the least you can do is keep the smile. So that's the first advice. The second advice is learn a lot. I mean, as an entrepreneur, you suddenly realize that your core discipline is not at all significant anymore. Whether you are an HR professional like me, I mean, Jharkhand Angels doesn't need too much of HR, right? It requires a whole lot of other things to succeed. My ability to understand the entire funding ecosystem, my ability to understand the entire angel ecosystem. So I have learned over the last 18 months, that's all I have done, learning the ecosystem of how startups get funded and how they scale. Before that, when I started my first company, I learned all about the fact that cash flow management is one of the most significant aspect of running a business compared to anything else. So learn and learn well. Invest time in saying that I don't know this and I need to figure this out. Simple things like making a P&L. You don't need a CA to make a P&L. A CA will make sure that it is built in the right fashion. But fundamentally, you can say revenue minus cost is equal to profit or loss. And that you should be able to do in a structured manner. You should be able to figure out what are genuine pivots and what are not. What I mean by that is genuine pivots are whether when you realize that your problem is the same, but the route to problem has changed. Not so genuine pivots are when you have actually become a new entity. It's perfectly all right to do that but in an ideal environment, you would have been that as well as this, right? You would have become a Tata or a Reliance where you can solve a cement problem. You can also solve a AI problem, right?
Correct.
That's the mental state for an entrepreneur, that you don't have to be either or, you can be all. Right? So when you pivot, the pivot should not be because my original idea did not work out. Pivot should be that my contours of my original idea did not work out. I'm still solving the same problem.
Correct. Correct.
That's a pivot. Otherwise, it's a change of business. So from that perspective, I think those are my advices. Biggest is, of course, have fun, because I believe that entrepreneurship is like the process of reproduction in reverse. The labor pains happen first, and any pleasure you derive is right at the end.
Correct. That's quite interesting piece of advice, I would say. That brings me to end of the questions from my end. So it has been a lovely interaction with you, Prabhash, and I personally got to know a lot about the VC ecosystem, right? And how those function and what are the key aspects or the angles that you have to look into, right? When you seek funding from, and what are the various aspects of funding or the sources from where you can get the funding. So it was pretty insightful conversation with you, Prabhash.
Well, it is my pleasure, because I'm actually on a journey of self-discovery myself on this. I'm learning as I'm going along. So every opportunity, when somebody presents it, somebody like you says that will ask me 5 questions, it actually helps me enhance my learning, because every question forces me to think. You can't really rehearse a question. You have to think on a question and be as accurate with your answer as possible. And that takes a lot of learning. So thank you for helping me do that. It has been my pleasure as well.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Prabhash.
Thank you.